I think we all know the struggle when things are out of routine, when we've had the bad news, when things aren't changing. Very interesting things happen to our energy. And sometimes it's as if our energy has literally evaporated. And it's very difficult to get out of bed in the morning. It's very difficult to have our routine and so on. It's as if we're carrying burdens the whole time. And I think a very useful image is from the Greek story about Sisyphus. And Sisyphus was condemned to carry the huge rock or boulder on his shoulders and go up the mountain. And then when he got to the top, it rolled down to the bottom, and he had to pick it up again and go up the mountain. And I think many of us feel that we're in a repeating Sisyphus situation. And how can we step aside and not need to pick up that rock and have it on our shoulders once again? But I want us to think about how can we change our energy level so that we can bounce back. And I'd like you all just to try the bouncing back gesture, which is, okay, bringing your two palms together and letting them go up. Yeah, and again, that's my sign for the bounce back energy. And if we can bounce back our energy, then we'll start to develop more resilience. One of the most important things that I will talk about today is theatre of resilience, which, as we know, is part of the NDP development. But I've not paid so much attention to it in recent talks. And I think in terms of finding resilience, that aspect of NDP and EPR are very, very important. We have to allow for transformation. And if we're heavy, carrying our burdens, moving more slowly, feeling depressed or dejected or rejected or any of these negative feelings, we need to find a pathway in order to change that. Otherwise, it's very easy to get just stuck in a cycle of negative energy, negative feelings. And remember, they feed each other. That if we're feeling negative, our energy changes. And we go on feeling negative, and our energy goes on being dissipated. So we have to quite consciously make that decision that we're going to, as it were, give ourselves a good shake. And maybe with our clients, we can find a way not to blame them. I mean, this is where so many people misunderstand creative means of working. It's not to turn around and blame your client for how they're feeling, but it's to support them and to encourage them to make a first step. Talking of first steps, I was working with one group of young adults who were very stuck, very frozen. So we all drew round each other's feet and then cut those out and then coloured them and then decided where did we want our feet to go. And that was a real fun thing to break through the being stuck. My feet won't go anywhere. And do you remember that song? I think, was it by Sandy Shaw? All about these boots were meant for walking. A long time ago, I think it won the Eurovision Song Contest. But it's a very good song for energy. So find an old recording, I'm sure it is on YouTube, and get a group, even if they don't know the words, to hum it along. And it's got quite a vital rhythm to it. These boots were meant for walking, and that is what they'll do. And one of these days these boots will go and walk all over you. And you can clap to the rhythm, and it's amazing. Just the music itself starts to energize people. Now, play therapy and drama therapy and therapeutic arts and all the different words we use, at the end come back to the strongest means of change, and that is theatre. We may do some music and some art and some drama and some interaction and some playfulness and all these things, but you could put them all together under the heading of theatre. And I know a lot of therapists will go as far as dance and drama and interactive drama, but stop short at the idea of actually using performance. People that did the drama therapy skills course with me will remember just how much we learnt when we actually started to put on our version of A Midsummer Night's Dream. And there was an enormous internal shift in how people felt about doing drama, what they were able to learn about themselves through the character they chose to explore. And the important thing about theatre, it enables you to play another person, so it is safe that you're not having to play yourself and be too vulnerable. You're playing another person, and then some shift happens internally because you've made this expression externally. So whereas a lot of therapists talk about going from the inside out, in many ways, theatre goes from the outside in, and is extremely powerful with that. So as we're doing the presentation today, have a think about the internal and the external, and how we can keep people safe by starting with the external. It may just be putting on a hat of any sort and walking around the room as if we were the person wearing that hat. But again, there's movement, there's a shift, and then we can start to explore, what's this character who wears this hat feeling? What is it that makes them who they are? Right, I'm going to now call up my presentation. Okay, so you can see me to the side, but the full screen will have the slides. And I always ask people to look at this logo because it's got so many roles and relationships. And just have a think about how many stories are in this one logo, both through the people and their groupings, as well as the creatures, the birds and the butterflies in the tree. And often children will ask, so who is sitting down leaning against the tree? And if you look closely, you'll see the person could have a screen or they could have a book. And that often becomes something to talk about. Are they on their own because they're with a screen? Or are they on their own because they want to read? Okay. So I'm doing a series now of these international webinars, and shortly there will be one every week on a Tuesday. So just bear that in mind. The series isn't fully starting yet, but there'll be a new title every week. So we shall have regular webinars on Tuesdays, okay? And remember, particularly those people who've already studied NDP and those people thinking they might, that we very much have an NDP community, that people link with other people. We have events specifically for members. We have a newsletter for people, and it's a very open group in many, many countries now, and people who spend time getting ideas from each other, and everyone is very supportive. So bouncing back. Now, we can use techniques from neurodramatic play, embodiment projection role, and theatre of resilience. And they can all be applied developmentally when children or teenagers or adults are recovering from crisis. And I think it's very important that we remember that something might not seem a crisis to us, but it might do to the child or to another adult. It may seem something quite small, but we must acknowledge the depth of feeling that goes with a crisis to other people. So we can't define a crisis as only the individual person can do that. Now remember that neurodramatic play, or NDP, is made up of these 4 components: sensory, messy, rhythmic, and dramatic, which means interactive play. And remember that these start not from birth, they start from conception. Before the baby is born, they're having a very, very sensory experience. It's also very messy because the water inside is quite sticky and slimy, isn't it? So already they're immersed in stickiness and sensory play. And most mothers during pregnancy will rock, which is where already the child is aware of rhythmic play. Quite apart from their own heartbeat and the heartbeat of their mother, which they can sense, there is the rhythm that comes from the mother rocking. And most mums do it quite spontaneously. They don't think about the rocking. Sometimes they'll have a cushion over their belly and hug the cushion like hugging the child and rock. People often ask me about dramatic play during pregnancy. And I think this is quite interesting because a lot of women talk to their unborn child. They will talk, they'll confide little secrets, they might tell a story, but there's an interaction going on between mother and unborn child, and fathers too, to a certain extent. But in my own research, I find dads do it less often than mothers, and dads tend to do it later in the pregnancy when there's a lot more awareness and the baby's already moving inside and so on. So dramatic play starts before we are born, and some mothers will talk to the unborn child and then answer themselves as if they were the child. So they'll put on little baby voices and answer their own question. The earliest example of role reversal is when this happens. Role reversal, as you know, is used in psychodrama between adults and role play and so on. But our capacity to role reverse starts much earlier. And the important thing about role reversal that we need to keep saying over and over again through role reversal is how we start to develop empathy. We'll talk a bit more about that in a moment, but all those ingredients are going on before the baby is born and then are getting developed in the first year of life. When babies are born, embodiment, projection, and role are starting to develop during the first 6 years of life. Embodiment, which includes neurodramatic play, is most emphasized during the first year, where there's a lot of sensory play, but there's also a lot of body movement. Embodiment doesn't stop when a child gets to a year old. It goes on growing and developing. And whenever there's a crisis, whenever there is a drama about something that's going wrong, whatever it is, always go back to the body, because it will have physical manifestations. Many children can't tell you how unhappy they are. They don't know the words, but they can tell you that they've got a very sore tummy. Always start with the body. Some children may be reluctant to move, and you may need to start with other techniques, but be aware what is going on with the body. What has closed down? Has movement stopped? Has sensory experience stopped? Are children not sleeping? Are they being very active? And so on. And I think in many cases, maybe not all, but in many cases, it's the greatest pity that they put a label ADHD on children who are very, very active, even hyperactive, rather than seeing which of the arts therapies and play therapy could actually address this hyperactivity. I mean, people that know me well also know that I'm very hyperactive, and I think if I had been born now, I would have had an ADHD label and maybe even medication, which would have been quite unfortunate, because yes, I have a lot of energy, but I also get a lot of things done. I use my energy. I find a focus for it. So embodiment is everything physical during the first year of life in the child's development, including NDP, including rhythm and sensory play and messy play. All of that is part of embodiment. And we notice that change around 11 months old, when the infant starts to get more interested in life beyond the body, and it's reaching out and picking up things, dropping things, getting somebody else to pick them up, and slowly more and more interest in toys, puzzles, art materials, and so on. So that goes on growing, that projective stage, from about 13 months to roughly 3 years. And every child is different. Some children stay in the projective stage until nearer 4 years old. Other children, when they're just turning 3, move on to the third stage, which is the role stage. So instead of everything being out there, it's come back in here again, in terms of playing roles, using different voices when they play with the puppets, when they read a story, and being interested in things being enacted. So whether we call it enactment or drama or role, we're talking about the same thing. I shall well remember a psychologist coming to talk to me one day. He said, "We don't do role play at our clinic, we do enactment." It's just a flower by another name, isn't it? It's all part of the drama process. And I want to describe to you a clinical example here, which I hope helps to clarify when children are ready for embodiment or projection or role. And this is applicable in all your clinical work. I and my colleagues had been organising an intensive week of embodiment, projection, role for children who were either suspended from school or at risk of being suspended, mainly because of behavioural difficulties and challenges. And we had 11 children, and I recruited 11 volunteers, play and drama therapy students, psychology students, and so on, so that every child would have a special adult to work with them. And I really like this as a clinical model, as an alternative to doing one-to-one work, but doing one-to-one work but within the group, because the children are getting the impact of having a special individual, but also the benefits of being in a social group. And I find that a very good combination. The children were aged, their chronological age was between 8 years and 11. Now, we started off every morning with rhythmic work, movement work, and we had an enormous drum on which they could send messages to each other, bounce balls on, and we'd make this boom sound. And they enjoyed the drum work so much, they said, could they do it every day? So we used to have it at the beginning and at the end of the session. We also did lots of drama games and pushing and pulling and climbing on each other, making bridges, etc., learning about trust, which was very important. And then we spent some time in the art room, where there was clay, paints, finger paint, and things to model with. And that combination worked extremely well. We had lunch together, and we had time outside, and then lots of physical games in the afternoon and some storytelling. Now, after 2 days, we did a gentle nudge, having done a lot of embodiment and projective work, towards role work. The effect from the children was extraordinary, and they tried to escape, they tried to climb through the window, they wound themselves up in the curtains, you name it, they tried to escape anything to do with role, which we all found as a staff team very puzzling. And I made sure that all the staff very closely observed their individual child partner. We went back to just the movement and the projective work, a lot of storytelling, and that settled down. But again, a little move towards role play, and they went crazy. I got the staff team to do some assessment of emotional intelligence, and we brought all that back to a group. And without exception, everybody observed that their partner, aged between 8 and 11, in terms of their emotional intelligence, were functioning around 2 years old. And that was quite startling. I'm used to having possibly 1 or 2 people in the group, but for the whole group to have such a low emotional intelligence was very surprising. So it became absolutely clear that these children, it wasn't that they wouldn't play roles, they couldn't play roles, because at age 2, and even a bit older than that, you're not ready for role play, you're not equipped for that, you're not ready to be somebody else when you're still discovering who you are yourself. So this was a huge eye-opener and really made me go back to my original research about embodiment, and out of that developed the detailed concept of neurodramatic play. There was a lot more to embodiment in terms of sensory work and rhythmic work and all those early issues to establish a secure base for the child. Because once you start to play a role, you're letting go of yourself and being somebody else. And that means you have to be very firmly anchored. So that was an enormous learning for this group. Something we also learnt through our observations was, although they wouldn't do role play as such, when they were not actively engaged in either the embodiment or the projective work, the messy play or the storytelling, they would exhibit what I call a dysfunctional role. So one boy would always start to play the clown again and try to make everybody laugh. Another boy would always be the loner and go and sit in the corner with his back to everybody. One of the girls took on a very helpless role when she wasn't engaged and kept pulling my sleeve and saying, Sue, I need to talk to you, I need you to do this, I want you to do that, and so on. So all 11 children displayed an unhelpful role when they weren't engaged in the play and art activity. Unfortunately, we lost one of the children because his mother and his grandmother kept arguing about who was bringing him, and one day he wasn't picked up to come to the group. And so they said they weren't going to bring him again. And that was a great pity, because he was one of the children who was playing the most disturbed personal roles and was beginning to start to trust the others in the group. So we then had the 10 children. Now, another aspect of this with this group is they really enjoyed having lunch, and the staff all sat down with them. We were all together for lunch. But they said they wanted to help to make the lunch, and could they take it in turns to help the grown-ups. So the one role that they would play out of their own choice was that of a chef. And they used to wear a chef's hat and a chef's apron. And it wasn't just making the food they took such care with. They also wanted to serve it like a waiter and have a napkin over their arm and ask people what they wanted. So the whole ritual of preparing and serving food seemed to be both a reality, but I think it was very symbolic of the nurture that they needed. So that's something, whether we're a play or a drama therapist, or whether we use creativity in our psychotherapy or counselling, to be aware of, that our creative development happens alongside all the other developments, and that role play or dramatic play will not happen until the child is secure enough and has got their strong creative base for that to happen. Okay, theatre of resilience. As I said at the beginning, I think many therapists steer clear of actual theatre. They will go as far as doing dramatic interactions, but actually using performance as part of therapy or therapeutic work is very often avoided. People that know the book by Bessel van der Kolk will write it in the chat later on, so you know the title. He's a very interesting American clinician who writes in his book about how theatre made such a difference, not only to his clients, but also to his son. And his son went into a long depressive phase and rarely got up in the morning and dropped out of school, and how this all changed when he joined a local theatre group and was in a performance of West Side Story. And if you think about West Side Story, how it is a very empowering story for teenagers, both the storyline as well as the movement and the singing. And if you don't know it, or if you've forgotten about it, find it on YouTube and play it, and you'll find it is something you can dance around your own house to. It's very invitational in that way. So we're talking about performance being a capacity for change. And as I said earlier, we're talking about initially going from the outside in. So we're talking about expression. If we have a drama workshop, lots of what we do in it is to prepare us for performance. We're thinking about our voice, the pitch of our voice, the sound of our voice. Does it carry? Do we feel free enough to allow our voice to happen? Now you think how often in therapy, either the child or grown up holds back with their voice and is very tentative or nervous about expressing something with their voice, or they use a voice that is not authentic. And it can be a very therapeutic revelation for them to realize where this voice came from, who it belonged to, and how they've internalized it rather than developing a voice of their own. So always listen to the voice of clients. It will tell you an awful lot about where they are at in their own development. So vocal expression, physical expression within a performance are going to bring about inner change. And it brings it about safely because you're within the context of a piece of theatre. And what is theatre but stories in action? And so for me, the performance in Theatre of Resilience allows for this expression which brings about inner change, which will then allow bounce back. You can see that almost like a figure of 8 going on. Now, those of you that know me well know that I use a lot of Shakespeare in my therapeutic work. And indeed, the trainings that I've done in Malaysia and Singapore, we've done the same and used mainly A Midsummer Night's Dream, although I have used other plays as well. And why? First of all, it gives safety. It has a structure that is removed from our own day-to-day experience. Secondly, it's about families and how they relate. It's about relationships and conflict, and it's about resolution of conflict. All of these things are crucial to bring about therapeutic change, and to be able to do it within the context of a play doesn't have to be Shakespeare. I just find it the most flexible way to work. And I don't know if any of you are aware that the Star Wars actor Patrick Stewart is reading a sonnet every day. He's now got to sonnet 52, I think. But you can get the back readings, and he's just sitting somewhere in his own home reading Shakespeare sonnets, and they are extremely beautiful and full of metaphors. So do look out for them. One character in A Midsummer Night's Dream that I think is very useful to us think about therapeutically is the character of Puck. And Puck, as we know, is what we call a trickster character. I think Puck probably has got ADHD too, because he's always dashing off here and there, planning one thing, doing another, taking on multiple roles and tasks, and sometimes indeed getting it wrong and getting things muddled up. He's a very energetic character, and I find that clients who play Puck find a lot about their own energy because of the way he is. And there's a very interesting scene in Midsummer Night's Dream where Puck has got an instruction wrong from the Fairy King and put the wrong magic potion onto somebody's eyes when it should have been for another one. And this is a very interesting starting point, even without reading the whole play, for a group of children in the role of Puck to talk to them and say, look, I'm just in such trouble. I made a huge mistake, and then explain what it is and ask the children, what should I do? What do you think? And immediately they're involved in a core piece of the play, but thinking up their own solutions and what should we do, and again at a metaphoric level they are problem solving, and that has to be good. Now I must have used Midsummer Night's Dream hundreds of times by now, but another interesting application was when I was working in a maximum secure hospital, where people went when they both were diagnosed with a mental illness as well as having committed extreme crimes. And we were doing A Midsummer Night's Dream mainly because I felt it was a therapeutic journey out of this rigidity of the court into the chaos in the forest, and then coming out again the other side. So through the story of the play, you actually could go on a therapeutic journey of chaos and change. This project lasted over 9 months, and to try and not be confused with the ordinary therapeutic groups, I used to go every 3 weeks for 4 hours. They were in all sorts of weekly groups and fortnightly groups and so on. But going every 3 weeks for 4 hours meant we could do extensive work on the play. It was slightly concerning for me to find out that at least a third of the people in the group had tried to kill their own mothers. And I did have a wonder why I was there at sometimes, but it was okay, really. Now, what we did was to saturate them in the story. So we watched the cartoon, we watched the video, we read the story, etc. So everybody firmly knew the storyline. And the part initially that intrigued them the most was what was the relationship between Hermia and her father, and what had happened to her mother. And they wanted to use that to explore dramatically through improvisation, to really think about Aegeus, her father, as a character, and why was he so angry. Of course, for all of them, one of the main themes was their anger. The anger, whether stimulated by their illness or whether it was a part of, that had driven them to such angry actions as killings or even multiple killings. So we spent more time than I thought we would on what about this family, what was going on, and they worked out some ideas and then wanted to share them with the group, get the group to comment on them and so on. We used masks, and they all chose a character and made a mask for that character. And I had a number of staff in the group who were also learning how to do drama therapy. And it was the patients helping the staff. So one patient wanted to make a very rough texture to his mask. And one of the patients said, "Oh, you use porridge oats. meet me in the kitchen tomorrow and bring your mask and I'll show you how to do it. And we'll just glue porridge oats on, and then you've got a really rough texture for the mask. And I thought it was really fascinating that it was that way round in the drama, that the patients had ideas to help the staff along. What was interesting diagnostically was that all the patients chose a character, either Oberon or Aegeus, Hermia's father. And those are the two characters who are consistently cruel to women. And by comparison, the staff, none of the staff chose those two characters. They all chose different characters in the play. So even before we've actually started, let's look at how much we have found out. So back to the theme of the resilience, performance, which means expression, which means inner change, and the capacity to bounce back. Now, the children or teenagers we work with who've experienced crisis or trauma may be fearful, anxious, worried, and we can probably think of a lot of other feelings too. And what happens, that their sensory system has been disrupted, and so have their thought processes. And they need help to re-experience their thoughts and their sensory integration. And here we can see the whole system as one mandala. So you see in the middle are all those aspects of the first year of play and the 9 months before birth. That it's sensory, it is messy, it has rhythm, and it is dramatic. And those aspects of NDP are very much at the core of attachment. So attachment is something active. It's not just a word, it's not just a thing out there. It actually has content. So attachments are sensory and messy and rhythmic and dramatic. That's part of the shared experience during the first year and during the pregnancy. And although some theoreticians maintain that attachment develops at the end of the first year, I think that it's earlier than that. I think it gets established during the pregnancy and in those very early months. The difficult thing for many families is that mums have to go back to work rather early. And I think if governments want to invest in futures and want a healthy workforce and less demand on clinical services, they would make it possible for mothers to stay home at least for a year, so that the attachment process that has developed during the pregnancy can be very solid and established during that first year. Personally, and this is my personal opinion, in an ideal world, I would say 2 years. But I think for many families, if they have got work, both parents need to be out earlier than that. So let's follow round our circle. So we've got the green, neurodramatic play, which is at the core of attachment. And then we can move on to the blue, that having got the attachment established, you've got the embodiment projection role. And through that will be developing empathy. Because as we said earlier, empathy is how the other person feels. We don't do certain things because we sense the other person would be distressed or hurt. Empathy is the capacity to feel as the other person, or as some people put it, to stand in the other person's shoes. And actually, you could actually do an empathy game. Remember when we talked about drawing around your feet and moving them? You can actually have, similarly, feet that have been drawn and step into them, and how does it feel to be in so-and-so's feet? And it could be a character from a film, it could be somebody else in the room, It could be a made-up character. The foot exercise is very good when you need to tackle bullying, by the way. That, how does it feel to be the one that's been bullied? So empathy, the capacity to feel how the other person feels. Now, of course, the green and the blue areas are very much helped during that early time by our mirror neurons. Remember that our mirror neurons reflect back to us externally what is going on. Again, why actually going to the theatre, let alone being in it, is very useful, because again, our mirror neurons are sending that back to us. And if empathy and attachment are established, that allows for the growth of resilience. It still needs development. Just as in traditional societies, there was a lot of resilience developing through the rituals, the seasonal rituals, the collective rituals, whether it's for religion, whether it is for our environment. Say in the countryside, there are lots of countryside rural rituals that involve singing and dancing and group work. Many are falling away now and we don't do them so often, but I think we need to remember that even if we don't use the old rituals, maybe we need to think about creating some new ones. And certainly thinking about the COVID-19 virus, how will we develop rituals to enable change for children and teenagers? What can we think about in terms of rhythm, movement, dance, storytelling in relation to the current crisis? Because things aren't going to return just of their own volition. We need, as teachers and therapists, to make interventions. Children need to be prepared for going back to school. Teachers too need some help preparing, because are they going back to a dangerous situation? Because it's by no means a fact yet that it's safe to go back. People going back to work, people who have other illnesses apart from the virus, and it's as if the world has become a dangerous place. I mean, once upon a time, the world was a dangerous place, and people had to work out ways to protect themselves, protect their families, keep, if you like, the monsters at bay. And over the centuries, we've found ways to keep ourselves safer and safer. Not from everything, but from many things. But now something like a virus, which is quite indiscriminate in how it's caught by people, and even people observing the most stringent cleanliness rules and protective garments and so on, are still catching it. And then, of course, there are political issues around how come people didn't have their protective clothing. But whichever perspective we look at the virus from, it is a factor in making our world dangerous. How are we going to deal with that? One of the things about lockdown is that we're relatively safe if we truly are locked down and not in contact with other people. But what is that doing to our roles and relationships? To lock down from the danger is one thing, but how do we emerge from that? It's as if we've gone into hibernation and we need to have some type of ritual to emerge back again. We hope that our empathy will help us, because we'll also be very much aware through our empathy how other people might be feeling and what their needs might be. But it is our resilience, our capacity to bounce back, that's going to help us function again in the world. And we need to think, what do we need in order to feel that? Now, we know after crisis or trauma, for many children, they will fight, or they will freeze, or they will run away. The 3 Fs. And I wonder, for many children, as a result of the pandemic, what are we noticing? Fighting, the running away, or the freezing? What about ourselves? Are we running away? Are we freezing? or are we fighting? Because it applies as much to us following the trauma of the virus as it does to children, particularly if people close to us have had the virus, if people we know or members of our own family have died. I mean, the death rates are quite astonishing in many countries. I think in Malaysia and Singapore, it is far fewer. But nevertheless, there is loss. How do we work with that? And how do we help children adjust to that? And of course, one aspect of the going back to school for children is that they've lost contact with their friends. There's been very little opportunity to interact with people, their best friend or their class or their favorite teacher. And are they going back to the same teacher, or will they have to process the loss of that teacher? So the whole routine and relationships of school have been damaged, and we need to think therapeutically how we can use our skills to prepare children for change back again, as well as dealing with what they're feeling right now. Important, we encourage parents to have as much art material at home as possible, particularly things for doing sensory play. I think that's very important. So clay, plasticine, flour and water. But now we've just heard, I don't know if you have heard the same, there's a shortage of flour for food. So we really can't justify doing flour and water play when there isn't enough to make the bread. So we think of other things we can mix together to make a mess. Soil from the garden, sand from the sand tray, etc. Three very evocative pictures, life after crisis. I think it's important that we remember that teenagers actually need far more sleep than we ever thought they did. In fact, some schools are choosing to start the school day at 10 o'clock so that teenagers get the sleep they need. The photograph of the child looking at the screen with all the circles, I think, is a very important reminder of how the screens can actually stimulate anxiety and fear. Very graphic details on the news, horror stories, that if the child's got a screen that they put under their bedclothes, we won't know what's going on. The child at the bottom has found another way of opting out. And I invite you to have a think whether the boy with the hand on his head, is he thinking? Has he got a migraine? What do you think is going on for him? I mean, I don't think he looks particularly happy. But what might be going on in terms of his own crisis? I just wanted to remind you that on this topic, the Activities for Social and Emotional Resilience is in print and is available. So just be aware of that, okay? The social anxiety book is not yet published. It'll be published in the autumn, but you can pre-order it. So they're both the same publishers, Hinton House. You can see written down the side. But Emotional Resilience is available, and Amazon stocks them as well as there's a certain shop. No, there's one bookshop in Singapore that stocks my books. But do book an advance copy of Social Anxiety, because then you can get it as soon as it comes out, okay? Our online community. Okay,